Hey, welcome back to another video. It is once again time to dive into the Mega Man franchise, and it didn't even take me 3 years to get around to it this time. I'm improving. Last year, I ranked every Mega Man X game in a video that took me forever to make, completely drained me, and that I had a ton of fun doing. This time around, we're moving away from home consoles, and we'll be spending all of our time on a Nintendo handheld with the Mega Man Zero games. I decided to drop the whole ranking aspect this time since I had plenty of fun just talking about each game as is, and I feel like trying to slot them into tiers really didn't add much of anything to the Mega Man X video, so this is just a plain old retrospective. For the record, I'm playing these games through the Mega Man Zero ZX Legacy Collection on Switch, and I'm using the collection's casual scenario mode for reasons that we'll get into later. There's really not much preamble we need to get into before we get to the meat of things, since, like before, I'm going to be talking about the differences between the X and Zero series when we're dealing with the actual games, but there are a few aspects that concern the series as a whole that I really couldn't fit into when discussing the individual titles without it feeling super repetitive. Like before, I'm really not discussing the narrative for these games, since that's never my focus, especially when it comes to side-scrollers like this. Zero does have a good bit more focus on its story than the X series did, especially starting from the second game, but if I'm totally real, I've never been able to get myself to care that much about Zero's story. It's not that the stories are bad or anything, they're pretty damn solid all things considered, and there are some really cool callbacks to the Mega Man X games, which is fitting given that this is a follow-up to them. Area Zero from Mega Man 04 being the place where the Eurasia colony crashed down in X5 is a nice little callback, and in the first game you can really tell they were working off of how X5 ended, in particular with Zero regaining the Z-Saber from X, who had it in the flash forward in X5's ending. Despite those particular details though, I just could never bring myself to give a shit about the story of the Zero games as a whole. At this point I usually skip all the dialogue when I'm playing through these games, but for the sake of the video, I actually did try one more time to get engaged while recording the footage, and I still could not do it. I paid attention to the story all the way through about the halfway point of the fourth game, and by that point I just checked out and started skipping cutscenes again. If you want a lore discussion or a recap or whatever, I'm sure there's more than a few good videos around for that. The music across the whole series is the kick-ass stuff you expect from a Mega Man game, though unlike with the X or Classic series, it's a bit tough for me to really single out any individual songs off the top of my head. Finally, the boss designs are all pretty wild in the Zero series. Unlike the Classic series with their noun mans and the X series with its adjective animals, Zero has whatever the hell they feel like in that specific game. They do tend to be animal themed, but the actual designs can vary wildly. It's certainly a unique approach to boss design, but it also leads to them being pretty hit and miss. You get really cool ones like Hellbat Schilt, Tech Kraken, and Fenry Luna Edge, who I briefly mentioned in my Mega Man X video, but there's also super lame ones like Burble Heckalot, Hanu Machine, and Poplakaka Petri. It doesn't help matters that, as you can tell, their names can be pretty wild too, both for the individual bosses and their collective group names. I don't think the ones in the first game even have a collective name. In 03, you get the 8 Gentle Judges, and 04 has the Einherjar 8 Warriors. It's not a big deal, but it can be tough to even talk about some bosses when I can't even commit to memory what they're actually called. It's not quite as simple as Robot Masters and Mavericks, you know? Right, I think that's enough of the series-spanning stuff, and hopefully nobody has clicked off by this point, so let's finally get to the individual games proper and dive in to Mega Man Zero.
Game Boy Advance.
俺を目覚めさせてどうしようって言うんだ。
ゼロから始まる衝撃の新シリーズロックマンゼロ。
Capcom.
The original Mega Man Zero was released in April of 2002 for the Game Boy Advance, developed not by Capcom themselves, but rather Inti Creates, a studio founded in 1996 by former Capcom employees. You might know them more nowadays from their work on the Galgun series, the many Azure Striker Gunvolt games and spin-offs, or the Blaster Master Zero trilogy, which started off great and then crashed really hard by the third one, but that series shitting the bed is neither here nor there. Much like the jump from Classic to X, you can see the shared DNA Zero has with the X series right from the get-go, what with the shooting and the dashing and the wall jumping, but there are a few shakeups here. Notably, instead of going stage by stage and picking which Maverick boss you want to fight, in Zero you instead choose which mission you want to tackle, each with their own objectives, and that'll have you revisiting certain areas a couple of times. The stages are also interconnected, so when you're not actively in a mission, you can actually travel to most of the individual areas where your missions take place. There's definitely some Metroidvania vibes to this overworld, but this is not a Metroidvania at all, although you can pick up some stuff you might have missed when playing through a mission, which is pretty neat. Now, this is a pretty interesting switch up from your traditional Mega Man formula, and by and large, most of the missions are still getting to the end of a stage and fighting a boss, but some of these are different, and many of them absolutely blow. The first mission that takes place in the desert, for example, is fine throughout most of it. Head to the left, beat the boss, standard stuff. But right after that, you need to escort this guy all the way back across the entire stage. This dude moves slow as ass, and you can't get too far away from him or else he'll stop, so you kinda need to inch along like this, and you also have to protect him from the many enemies hanging around, because if he takes too much damage, he dies, and you fail the mission. Thankfully, he can take a good bit of punishment, so it's not like you have to keep him from getting hit by anything at all, but it's still a huge slog entirely because of how slow you need to walk just to keep from getting too far ahead of this guy. The second factory mission's a real pain too, requiring you to find and defuse 8 bombs under a time limit. In concept, this isn't too bad, but in practice, it is deeply irritating thanks to one specific section. About halfway through the stage, you come to this section with moving platforms, and there are a handful of bombs hidden here. Problem is, thanks to the screen size, they're often off-screen, and even if you do know where the bombs are, going up to get them often means your platforms are off-screen now, and since they, move, it can be really easy to fall to your death because you don't know if there's a platform beneath you. There are walls to cling off of where you can sort of slide down and get a bit of a look, but it's a brief peek and doesn't really help much. This is a mission where the collection's casual scenario really helps, same with the save assist, which gives you more checkpoints. The timer resets when you respawn, and there are checkpoints right at a couple of the bombs, so that mitigates some of the annoyance, but I still dread this mission every time I play this game. Screen crunch in general is sort of an issue with Mega Man Zero. Outside of the problems with that factory mission, there's the occasional leap of faith, and it's not uncommon for enemies to come from off-screen quicker than I can react to them, which is especially annoying in that escort mission. Another change for this game is that you're not going to be acquiring boss weapons like in previous Mega Man installments. Instead, you get 3 elemental chips from specific missions, and most, but not all, bosses are weak to one of these 3 chips. Also, the element only applies on a charged attack, so you better get used to holding down that attack button. In theory, this is more simplistic than getting 8 different weapons, but at least for me, it actually ends up being more difficult to remember all the weaknesses for some reason. There's a couple I remember pretty easily, like Harpuya being weak to the ice chip, or Blizek Stagroth being weak to fire, but with most of them, they just do not stick in my brain for some reason. I'm willing to admit that that's entirely user error though, and not really the fault of the game. You do still get a couple of different weapons from some missions, but there's only 2, and frankly, you're probably still going to be spending most of the game with the Z-Saber and Buster Shot. I truly cannot recall the last time I actually used the Triple Rod or the Shield Boomerang. Another noticeable change from the Mega Man X series is that there aren't any heart tanks or sub-tanks to find in the levels. Instead, the only collectibles to be found are Cyber Elves. Cyber Elves are helpful little buddies who can grant you various effects like stunning enemies, lifting you out of pits, healing you, or increasing your health or granting sub-tanks. If you're playing normally, you're going to need to feed energy crystals to Cyber Elves to fully awaken them, and it can take a lot to fully awaken a Cyber Elf. On casual scenario, not only do you not need to feed them crystals, but you start with every Cyber Elf unlocked and at max health with all 4 sub-tanks. This system isn't bad, though it is a bit odd to me to add an extra step to getting more health in sub-tanks since you have to collect the Cyber Elf and use it, but the big issue with Cyber Elves comes in with the game's ranking system. Yep, Mega Man Zero gives you rankings at the end of a stage, and if you use any Cyber Elves at all, it is going to have a negative impact on your rank. In the results screen, there's a specific field for Cyber Elves, starting off by giving you 15 points for having not used any of them, and every elf you use takes away at it, with permanent elves, like the ones that increase health, having a permanent impact on your rank. So, if you use enough of them, you can actually end up with a negative elf score, which is really gonna fuck up your rank. I can sort of understand the ones that lower a boss's health or something affecting your rank, because those are hugely advantageous, especially if you're going without extra health. but I think it's really dumb that any cyber elf at all lowers your rank. Thankfully, getting a high rank doesn't really mean much of anything beyond bragging rights in 0-1. Okay, there is a cyber elf that you get if you beat the game with an A or S rank with every cyber elf collected and fully upgraded, but don't use any of them, but that is so not worth the effort, so as far as I give a shit, there is no reason to gun for a high rank. I still think it's a stupid thing in principle, though. Still, if you're somebody who stresses about getting good ranks in games, then 0-1 is definitely going to have you doing that, and it won't be the only thing you stress about. See, you can also completely fail a mission in this game if you run out of lives, and on your first run-through, or if you're going without cyber elves so you don't have any health, you're probably gonna die a lot, and extra lives are super rare. And if you fail a mission, that's it. You can't try it again, and you've missed out on whatever rewards you might have gotten from it, like a cyber elf or an elemental chip. The game isn't unbeatable if you miss out on those things, but it does make it much harder, so it feels like the game punishes you for being bad at it by making the game even harder so you're even worse, which isn't great. Thankfully, this is another thing that Casual Scenario and Save Assist help out with. Save Assist in particular, since it pretty much acts like a save state, so when you die, you don't actually lose a life. Some people are probably going to dig that extra challenge, and that's all well and good, you don't have to use those features, but between that and the ranking, it's all a bit stressful for me, and I'm not exactly playing a game to get stressed out, so I have zero qualms making use of the developer-provided easy mode. And there's one more annoying aspect about this game that we have to go over. You need to level up your weapons. Yeah, you start out with pretty weak attacks, but the more you use your weapons, the more options you're going to get, like a slashing combo for the Z-Saber, or being able to have more shots from the Buster on screen at once. Pretty cool idea, although when you start out it's a little bit completely miserable since you have very little at your disposal. The main problem is that leveling weapons takes a good while, especially since you're getting experience based on what attacks you're using with a particular weapon, rather than getting universal XP per weapon. So just sitting there slashing at infinitely respawning enemies isn't going to max out your Z-Saber. You're eventually going to need to spam dash slashes and charged hits and shit. It's kinda awkward. This is thankfully another thing that Casual Scenario takes care of, as all of your weapons start fully maxed out, which is a huge relief for me, but I have gone through without it, and yes, grinding weapon levels is very annoying. Not difficult exactly, but extremely irritating. Now, despite all of that complaining that I have just done, I do still generally enjoy Mega Man Zero. The core gameplay is damn solid, there are far more fun missions than there are annoying ones, the more irritating mechanics are negated with the assist features in the collection, slicing through enemies with the Z-Saber is super satisfying, especially with that mid-air spinning slash. It is a fun game, despite these problems. It's even got a really cool bit of flair where if you beat a boss with a Z-Saber attack, it'll slice him in half, which is super satisfying and is one of the main reasons why the Saber is the weapon I use the most. That, and I mean, come on, the Saber is Zero's whole deal, of course I'm going to use that more than the Buster. All in all, the original Mega Man Zero is kind of a mixed bag. There's a lot that bugs me about this specific game, annoying mechanics and missions, the screen size causing issues sometimes despite the game being friggin' made for the GBA, but it is still a generally fun time despite all that. I still go back to play it a lot, and I never think about skipping it when I decide to do a Zero Marathon, which is pretty much every year. Unlike the original Mega Man X, which was already a pretty fully formed great game with a few small annoyances, Mega Man Zero is a super rough around the edges experience that, despite its many flaws, is still a good time. Luckily for us, it's all uphill from here on out.
Game Boy Advance.
誰も知らないゼロが目覚めるロックマンゼロ2 capcom.
In true Mega Man fashion, about a year later in May of 2003, Mega Man Zero 2 released on the Game Boy Advance. This time around, they've ironed out a lot of the kinks from the first game and made Zero 2 a much more refined experience. For one, the mission structure is dropped, and we're back to a more traditional stage select where you're picking a boss to go after rather than a particular objective. You can't fail missions outright anymore, so you won't miss out on an elemental chip, which are also back. and there's way fewer annoying missions in this game. In fact, there's only one that I'd qualify as annoying, that being the second half of the game's intermission stage. You have to protect CL while she disables a bomb, and while this only takes like 2 minutes, it feels like it lasts just short of forever, and near the end the screen is covered in bullets, and you gotta deal with these hopping guys too. The returning shield boomerang actually helps a lot here since it can deflect shots, but you can't actually hit anything with it unless you've charged it, so you're gonna have to swap between it and the Z-Saber a bunch, and if you're like me, your fingers are gonna get confused, and you're gonna screw up a couple of times. It's a good thing CL can take some damage here, because if you had to keep her from getting hit at all, this would be unbearable. While there are some individual objectives in a couple of stages, they're really mostly for rank, and your main focus is going to be taking down bosses more than anything else. Yeah, the ranking system is still here, and it's unfortunately a bit more important this time around. Every boss in Mega Man Zero 2 has what's called an EX skill, which is basically like the boss weapons that you get in the Classic and X games. You can acquire these skills for yourself, but only if you get an A or S rank on the stage. Otherwise, you're getting jack and shit. The game does throw you a bit of a bone here, since it apparently only checks if you entered a stage with an A or an S rank, not if you completed it with one. So, if you got an A rank on, say, the opening level, you can nab yourself a free EX skill. Thankfully, EX skills are not necessary. You can very much complete the game without them, as I usually need to. There's no way in hell I'm getting an A rank on every stage in this game. There are 4 Cyber Elves that grant you an A rank in a stage. That way you can grab a few EX skills if you really want them, but don't want to grind for A ranks. Really wouldn't blame you for using these. Yep, Cyber Elves return, and they still affect your rank if you use them, so the game is once again discouraging you from using its main collectible in any capacity, but at least this time you can pick up 2 sub-tanks in the stages, so you have a bit of leeway for restoring health if you're trying not to use elves. Reminder that in the first game, all of your sub-tanks came from using Cyber Elves. I just fail entirely to understand why they included this system if they were going to punish you for using it. And it's not like it's a little side thing either, it's the main collectible of these games. It's like if Zelda games gave you a middle finger for collecting heart containers. And because exactly 0 people in the infinite expanse of the universe wanted it, weapon leveling has returned. The system is more straightforward this time. You just need to kill enemies with a weapon rather than using specific moves or whatever like in the first game, but it can still take a while to grind out your weapons, and it's another reason why I continue to play on casual scenario, so I don't need to deal with that nonsense. While we're on weapons for a sec, the selection of them is largely the same as the previous game. Saber, Buster, and Shield Boomerang all return, but the Triple Rod has been cast right into the pits of Hades and replaced with the Chain Rod, a sort of whip-like thing that can hang onto ceilings and the 4 grapple points that are in the game, and it can also pull items and enemies towards you. Like before, I tend to stick with just the Z-Saber and Buster Shot, but there are a couple of times when you'll need to use the Chain Rod, and I already mentioned that mission where the Shield Boomerang comes in handy. They still don't get that much use, though. There is one new addition in Zero 2, that being extra forms that you can acquire. Forms are unlocked by meeting specific criteria within a mission, and then they'll unlock at the end of that mission. For example, deflecting 30 shots from enemies with the Shield Boomerang unlocks Erase Form, which lets you erase enemy shots with the Z-Saber. Some of these are kinda neat, like Rise Form and X Form, but honestly, most of them aren't that good. To use Erase Form as an example again, sure, you could use it to get rid of enemy shots, or you could just keep using the Shield Boomerang for that, and not only would you not get hit by that attack, you also reflect it back at the enemy, which is way more useful. Ultimate Form is, as you might guess, pretty damn good though, and you start out with it if you play on casual scenario. But the method to unlock it normally is a little strange. To unlock it, you have to finish the game after having used every single Cyber Elf, which is going to lock you into a low rank for that entire playthrough, since you can only use the form on New Game Plus, and the penalties from Cyber Elves carry over. So if you want to get every EX skill and unlock Ultimate Form, tough luck. The only way to do this is to play on casual scenario in the Zero ZX collection. Unless I'm wrong, which is definitely possible. I found some conflicting information on whether or not the penalties actually carry over. Screen size is a lot less of an issue this time around, since there aren't really any more missions where there's something just barely hiding off screen. There's still a small annoyance with enemies appearing a bit too soon for me to react, but that really might just be a me problem at this point, since it's almost exclusively an issue with these little rolling guys. These guys are like my kryptonite, I have no idea what my damage is. Despite locking EX skills behind high ranks and keeping the annoying weapon leveling system, 02 is a much more polished game than the first. They did work out a lot of the kinks, and moving from 01 to this game feels like a breath of fresh air, honestly. And again, I do really like Mega Man 01, it's just this game is a whole hell of a lot better. Even though it was a non-issue for me since I was using casual scenario, it's still nice not to have to stress about failing missions or fumble around doing different attacks for weapon leveling. It really feels like 02 is the more fully realized title between this and the first game. Now that I think about it, the same thing happened with Mega Man Battle Network to a degree. The first game in that series felt like it was a proof of concept, and Battle Network 2 actually felt like it got, finished. Well, that's neither here nor there. 02 is damn good, and spoiler alert, the next game's even better.
Game Boy Advance.
Capcom.
Just shy of a year after 02, the world was given Mega Man 03 on the 23rd of April, 2004. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Mega Man 03 was intended to be the last game in the Zero series, but things didn't exactly work out that way. It didn't exactly help that the story of this game ends with its main villain still getting away, so they left a loose end even when they were planning to end the series. Much in the same way that 02 ironed out some of the weirdness from the first game, 03 irons out weirdness from 02. And with this entry, we're finally free of a couple of the more pain-in-the-ass mechanics. For one, weapon levels are gone. Thank fuck. No longer do you need to find a spot to kill enemy after enemy to get your weapons to a usable level of strength. I have no idea why it took 3 games for Inti Creates to figure out that this wasn't fun, but at least they did finally figure it out. There's also another new weapon added this time. Say goodbye to the chain rod, they took it out back and shot it, and say hello to the recoil rod. This sure is a thing that they added to this particular video game. It's a lot more of a close range option than even the Z-Saber. Seriously, the range on this thing is short, and I really don't find myself wanting to use it in combat over the Saber. It can be used to push heavy items around or break some blocks, but again, I pretty much stuck with the Z-Saber and the Buster Shot. Cyber Elves are also generally more worth using now because they've been divided into 2 categories: Fusion Elves and Satellite Elves. Fusion Elves are essentially just like how elves in the previous games worked, providing a one-time effect that also has an impact on your rank. Satellite Elves are different, however, in that they orbit Zero to provide a constant benefit that doesn't affect your rank whatsoever. Now, a lot of the really helpful elves, like the ones that increase your health, are Fusion Elves, so there's still a negative to using those, but at least now there are some that you can use without damaging your rank if you care about that sort of thing. So you're not completely discouraged from interacting with one of the main mechanics of the game. I know I keep harping on this, but it's only because it's stupid. EX skills are back and still require an A or S rank to snag them, which is a little bothersome, but since you can use at least some Cyber Elves to give you some assistance, it's not quite as brutal this time around. I still didn't end up using Cyber Elves really, because I don't find a lot of the effects that necessary, and I don't care about getting all the EX skills, but it's still good that the option is finally there after 3 fucking games. There's also another change-up in how you can adjust Zero's individual abilities this time around, with the various unlockable forms having been replaced by chips that you can equip to Zero's head, feet, and body. You'll get a lot of these from beating bosses, no rank required, and these can give you extra abilities like charging weapons faster, sliding down walls slower, getting rid of recoil when you get hit, and a variety of other effects. I love the chip system, and it's always so difficult to go back to 0, 1, or 2 and not have it available. Now the real star of the show here are the Ultima Boots, a foot chip that has the effects of every other foot part in one. Normally you can only get these by beating a secret boss in the literal last level of the game, so you'd need to carry them into New Game Plus to use them outside of that, but you also start out with them in, say it with me now, casual scenario. They can absolutely destroy the game if you're good enough, especially thanks to that double jump, so if you are sticking in casual mode like me, but don't want to totally walk through the game, then maybe steer clear of the Ultima Boots. Speaking of that secret boss though, that does lead me to one of the downsides about 03. A new aspect introduced in each stage are these blue doorways that lead to cyberspace. Within cyberspace is a slightly easier route through a section of a stage, with fewer enemies and more health drops. Sounds pretty neat, but going into the cyberspace routes will take away from your rank, so it'll be harder to get EX skills if you're after those. But to get to that secret boss, you need to enter cyberspace, so you're going to have to take some hit to your rank for that. Thankfully there aren't any EX skills in the endgame stages as far as I'm aware, but if you're a stickler for getting high ranks regardless, just going for this item is going to affect that. Really hope you're not a perfectionist and a completionist. Despite that though, it does feel like there was a lot more thought put into what does and doesn't hit your rank this time around, and with the addition of the chip system, it feels less like you're missing out on something if you don't go for the EX skills, since you can still augment your playstyle a bit. I still personally think locking them behind high ranks is a bad move, especially since one of the main ideas behind Mega Man as a series is getting abilities from bosses, but at least there's other options this time, and you'll usually still get something from a boss. Mission structure is the same as 02, going after bosses rather than completing individual missions, though like that game, there are also other objectives to clear in a few stages. For example, there are these switches that you need to press to lower the water level in Childre Inarabita's stage, but again, these are not necessary to complete. Hidden in a lot of missions, you'll find secret discs, which can contain a variety of things from lore to cyber elves and even a handful of chips. You have to talk to Servo to decode these, but if you're in casual scenario, these are unlocked from the get-go. Also, like 02, there's exactly one annoying stage, that being Voltiel Biblios. The gimmick here is that about halfway through, you come to a console that gives you information on 4 files that you need to find for plot reasons. Selecting each one on the console shows you the door that they're located behind in the following room, which is just this huge grid of doors and nothing else. They're all color-coded, so you can memorize the location of the door you're looking for relative to the others, and this is made even easier if you've got save assist on, because you can see the checkpoints when it shows you their location. But they still pretty much leave my brain immediately, and I always end up brute forcing it by going through each door in order. It absolutely tanks your rank to do this, but what do I give a shit, I'm not getting high ranks anyway. And that's definitely a bit of user error, but even if I could remember them all without fail, it's just not an exciting mission. You get a bit of an actual level before the console and in the section after it, but it really is largely just grabbing those files, and once you've got the last one, the boss shows up. So it's pretty dull overall. This is not helped by Voltiel Biblio himself being probably the lamest boss in the entire game, and maybe even all of the 0 series. It's basically just a game of whack-a-mole where you're waiting for Voltiel Biblio to poke his head out of one of the holes in the arena, which is usually long enough to get a full charge, especially if you've got the faster charge head chip equipped, then rinse and repeat. His attacks are pretty easy to avoid generally, and whenever he does completely come out into the arena, he's basically a sitting duck. All the other stages and bosses are pretty solid, so Voltiel Biblio really stands out as lackluster. I also kinda question the inclusion of 3 bosses from Mega Man 01 about halfway through the game. I get they were tying it back in because this was supposed to be the end of the series, but it felt a bit more like padding than anything else, sorta like the Doc Robots in Mega Man 3. The stages and fights aren't terrible, and unlike the Doc Robots, they aren't barely altered versions of levels you just did, but I really feel like you could remove them from the game and you wouldn't lose anything. 03 is generally considered the pinnacle of the 0 series in my experience, and it's really not tough to see why. They finally got rid of weapon leveling, added the chip system, which is cool as hell, and you're not discouraged from using cyber elves entirely for once. If this had been the last Mega Man 0 game, it would have been a great way to go out. Gameplay-wise anyway. Seriously, what the hell were they thinking ending the story with the main bad guy still getting away?
Game Boy Advance.
そして全てがゼロになるロックマン04
Capcom.
The Mega Man 0 series would finally come to a close when Mega Man 04 released in April of 2005, 2 days short of a year since the previous game. Since 03 did most of the work in polishing up the series, 04 doesn't really have that much it needs to improve on, just little things here and there. That's not to say there's nothing new though, because 04 does have some tricks up its sleeve. Cyber Elves have been simplified even further, to the point where instead of having a bunch of them to use or equip, you get one that you can customize the abilities of. You can also choose a couple of different names for it, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to be using the default name, Croar. This actually throws me for a loop at the start of the game every single time. Since you need to do the 2 intro missions before you get Croar, and her abilities also determine your max health, you can't take very much punishment for those first 2 missions. It's not insanely difficult or anything, I just always have to remember to ease off the gas a little, as it were. Under regular circumstances, there is a limit to how much you can push Croar's abilities, and going beyond that level will affect your rank, but if you play on casual scenario, you don't need to worry about that, and you can max it out with no worries right from the start. Personally though, I wouldn't suggest maxing out every single stat, because if you do that, then Croar is going to be firing off elemental shots constantly, which I'm really not a fan of. It's a shame too, because some of the effects along the animal line, where that ability comes from, like double defense, are really helpful, but having those projectiles flinging out at all times really bothers me. Or at least that's how it works in casual scenario anyway. As far as I can gather, when you're playing normally, the effects don't overlap like that, at least not by default, so getting double defense won't also mean you're shooting projectiles all the time. There's one point towards not using casual scenario, I suppose. But you really can customize this as much as you desire. You could leave it at nothing on everything, or max out all the fields, or go somewhere in between. You can't pick and choose as many effects as before, which is kind of a letdown, but hell, at least I actually use the Cyber Elf in this game. Plus, with this particular system, it's a lot less likely that you're going to have an impact on your rank from using a Cyber Elf, and I very much appreciate that. Speaking of, ranking is a little bit reworked in this game. Namely, it's entirely for bragging rights now, even more so than in 0-1. Rank unlocks exactly nothing in 0-4, which I guess will bug some people, but I couldn't care less, and I'm glad to see it just exist for a show of skill, or in my case, a lack thereof. But if rank doesn't unlock anything, you may well be wondering if EX skills are still a thing in this game. Indeed, they are still here, though you unlock them with a different method this time around. 0-4 has this system where every stage has 2 weather states. One is advantageous to the player, the other to the boss. If the stage icon is glowing like this, then that means that the weather is advantageous to the boss. Beating a stage with the weather in the boss's favor will net you their EX skill, so you can very easily acquire every single one of these things. The weather can make some stages a bit harder, but it's never that huge of a change if you ask me, so I always have the weather set to the boss's favor. Plus, you're gonna want at least some of these EX skills, since they decided for some reason to drop the elemental chips altogether, so the only way to hit a boss's elemental weakness is with EX skills. With some bosses though, that is much easier said than done. In particular, trying to hit Soul Titanian and Heat Gemblem with their weakness, electricity, is pretty much a crapshoot with either of the 2 options at your disposal. Tractor Shot requires that you absorb projectiles to get it to do more than mildly irritate a boss, and neither of them have projectiles that can be absorbed, and Thunder Stab is an augmented dash slash. This is a real problem with Soul Titanian since she spends most of the fight up in the air, and you can't possibly hit her with the damn thing there. And as far as Gamera here is concerned, you can definitely hit him with Thunder Stab, but at least in my experience, that also usually leads to you dealing damage to him, followed by immediately ramming your face right into his crotch. The other EX skills are a lot more usable overall, especially the other 2 elemental buster shots, since they're, actual projectiles that don't need you to absorb enemy attacks. Flame Fang is pretty damn good too, and even once I got Burst Shot, the fire attack for the buster, it was my main source of fire damage. It feels great to actually get to use most of these fucking things, all thanks to them finally not locking them behind getting a high rank. Like, I enjoy doing well in the game as much as anybody, I gun for S ranks in Sonic games all the time, but I appreciate not being required to get a high rank just to get these abilities. The regular weapon selection in 0-4 is a bit more limited than previous titles, only having 3 available. There's the Z-Saber and Buster Shot, obviously, but they've also introduced the Zero Knuckle, which lets you steal weapons from some enemies. It's a sorta neat little tool, and on my first couple of playthroughs it was fun to experiment and see what weapon you might get from an enemy, but most of what you can grab isn't that useful, and a lot of them have limited uses, so 90% of the time, I just stuck with the Saber and Buster. There are a couple of times when you're required to use this thing, like in the mid-stage when you need to grab these water turret enemies to put out fires, and then again near the end of the game when you have to pull 4 switches. It's also genuinely helpful in Nobleman Drago's stage since you can use it to tear right through these vines. The chip system's back from 0-3, and it's still awesome, though some of the more busted stuff isn't here anymore. Notably, there are no Ultima boots, so you can't have every foot chip effect on at once, but that's fine. The double jump is still here, and that's more than enough for me. Though maybe I should have swapped that out sometimes, at least in Pegasalti Eclair's stage, since there's all this wind that gave me a lot of trouble on this playthrough for some reason, and the Spike Type W boot chip definitely would have helped me there. Also, if you're playing on casual scenario, this is probably going to be the first Zero game where you have to worry about getting killed by spikes, since unlike the first three, the easy difficulty doesn't stop those from being instant death. That protection is relegated to the strongest series of body chips, which converts death traps into just doing damage. I tend to spend 0-4 with the rolling body chip equipped because I love that mid-air spinning slash, but because I'm also incredibly reckless, I ran into spikes more than a couple of times. Between the chips and Croar, Zero is super customizable in this game, and I absolutely love that. Everyone's going to have their preferences for chip setups and how you want Croar configured. You can have things set to make it more difficult for yourself, like not using any of Croar's abilities and only equipping the junk chips, which double the damage you deal, but also the damage you take, so you can really make the game as easy or hard as you like, even in casual scenario. While most people seem to cite 0-3 as their favorite in the series, and I can totally get that, it is a great game, for me, it's gotta go to 0-4. Finally not having to worry about rank for anything is a huge weight off my shoulders. I vastly prefer this setup for Cyber Elves. There's not a single stage I don't enjoy. I just love this game, dude. I've got nitpicks, sure, like the Zero Knuckle being pretty lame and not liking either of the electric attacks you get, but those are pretty small issues in the grand scheme of things, and I'm always excited when I get to play 0-4 again. And with that, we've come to the end of Zero's adventures. This series is a bit more uneven than X and Classic, what with the first game being super rough and needing 2 to really iron things out, and even then it wasn't until the third game when it really felt like they totally nailed it. That said, Zero is a series I go back to a lot, and I don't ever feel like skipping over any of the games when I'm doing a marathon. Unlike Classic, where I tend to ignore 7 and 8, and X, where I pretty much call it quits after X5. While X is overall still my preferred flavor of Mega Man, Zero really isn't far behind, and I'm not sure how many times I've played through these games at this point. I used to play the DS Zero collection on the bus on the way home from school a lot, so I've gone through them plenty of times. Back when this was still going to be a ranking video, my initial plan was actually to cover the Zero and Mega Man ZX games in the same video, since I figured just ranking both ZX games wouldn't be that interesting, but since this moved away from that format, I figured I'd keep this just to Mega Man Zero. Besides, the ZX series is different enough that it really wouldn't feel totally right not giving them their own spotlight. Rest assured though, it probably won't be that long before we get to them, likely even shorter than the gap between the X video and this one. At the time I'm writing this, I've already finished a practice playthrough of the first game, and by the time this gets uploaded, I imagine I'll have finished my practice playthrough of Advent as well. So yeah, it probably won't be too incredibly long before we're back with Mega Man again. But for now, that's going to be it from me. I hope you have a great day, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is for you, and I will see you guys next time.